I don't know that there's any prep I can do that would like help.
You know what's weird? This is it now. This is the prep we're doing. It's nice.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.
Starting to load. Thus spoke Zarathustra, Goertzel. Welcome to the show, buddy. How you doing?
Oh, I've historically been very bad at answering these questions. Yeah, usually I need to be given specific queries, but like,
Oh, okay. Well, if you prefer,
I'm a human. I was born on Earth, and
I like all that. See, that's the
I'm
thing. You know,
generally interested in trying to understand and experience almost everything. Where the almost gets rid of things like being a whale that's boiling in blubber for 2 billion years. Like, I'm very unsure about wanting to experience that.
right. So there's certain experiences. Yeah, that's the Siddhartha thing that kind of bugs me, right? Because you're put in this position where you're allowed to experience everything you want, except for suffering. And then even if you could have suffering, you're like, I don't know. You know, at some point, if you've had it, also that's something and that comes up a lot when we're talking about ethics and humanity. Well, one of the reasons we were talking is because we're really interested in artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and this idea of ethics. So I know that you have been working on a project with Sumo, right? Maybe you could elaborate a bit about the project.
Okay. Well, the core motivation of the project is in part that I think from the general AI background, I've been very interested in like what are values and like motivations in the first place. And I tend to think these are not fixed for life, like within one being or a society, these can change as we explore and experience worse. And yeah, I've been thinking about ethics from the top-down view of like what systems can actually work out and what are people actually trying to coordinate together. And it seems like there are more or less 3 main paradigms of ethics. Like you have your rules that you like must obey or else. And there are others that just say like, you should be a good person. Here are some ideas as to what a good person is. And like a good person does things for the right reasons. Like you can't just not lie and cheat and steal because you think we're going to catch you. Then you're not a good person. You're just obedient. I think abiding the law is probably considered like one of many virtues. So that's the only one you'd have. Then there are the people who say like you should just calculate all the pain and pleasure in the world somehow, and you should just like maximize it. Like I think you're probably aware of people like David Pierce and like the transhumanist community. They're sort of like negative utilitarian maximalists. They're like, this is all that matters. Reduce suffering, period.
As generally as possible, right?
Yeah, and it's like, then you have charts that are actually, I find really cool, like trying to categorize on like a logarithmic scale, like the different degrees of pains in the world. Ideally pleasures too. And clearly the most important thing is getting rid of like those really bad ones. Like what is worse than childbirth?
I mean, maybe death, I guess.
Death? Is that so bad?
Well, so that's a whole wild topic we're gonna have to explore. But let's work with pain for a second. Let's explore pain because it's not in terms of pain. I suppose certain kinds of cancers, certain kinds of prolonged sufferings, or maybe worse than immediate, quick, crisial experiences of pain. You know?
Like really, really bad, like cluster headaches or something that just sort of come on randomly and hit you and they seem senseless and meaningless.
If they last for a really long time and they have no,
and like
they don't come with remote view.
Like, you know, it's coming, you can sort of prepare for it. You know, it's gonna end. And
there's this reward. So that's the thing. When you talked about altruism, I kind of feel like you're saying like there's the difference between hedonism and altruism, or selfishness versus what's good for the greater many or something. I
have a lot of trouble understanding what hedonism actually means.
Right. Well, that's funny because I don't know if it means something necessarily evil or bad, you know, and I think they've talked about like the problems with restricting existentialism as well. But libertinism can lead to syphilis. So I was gonna say though, with the difference with altruism is it's not always that you're stopping at a stoplight because it's gonna kill you to go through the stoplight. It's because someday your kid might die at a stoplight if he goes through it, right? So this idea of prolonging the system, that they're creating a system that's perpetuating, that you're trying to perpetuate an environment because even if the individual dies, the human organism is pseudo immortal. Like we're sort of this immortal jellyfish that if as long as we continue, somehow this thing stays alive. So altruism plays into a different kind of role dynamic because it's not just for the individual, which is tormented by that because they're trying to survive on their own, but they never can because they're only part of this bigger thing. Well,
Like, if you get into that, I think it's no longer seems like normal hedonism so much. Like, I want hedonism for like all of my possible future selves, and I'm going to calculate this carefully with a very great delayed gratification. And like future selves are just like different selves, time-like manner. So let's do different selves in a space-like manner too. And then I'm wishing hedonic pleasure for like all people in the universe. And this no longer sounds like the typical hedonism that people are critiquing.
Right. I mean, we start to reduce or we abstract hedonism from the consequences we've found with hedonism. But you look at periods in history where there's been hedonism and there's been a lot of, there's disease, there's all sorts of problems that seem to emerge. It seems like plagues follow hedonistic periods. So it's a kind of wonder. I mean, it's not, I don't know, is there something to suffering that keeps us alert? Or, we found there's, I mean, that's one of the main worries. We look at humans who have no sensorial pain, and it's not like a benefit in any way. So
no, Cameron.
Yeah,
like she might be an example that proves like the rule that it's difficult, but like it seems like once you make it through childhood, you might be kind of all right.
I mean, it seems like it's a lot to have to monitor everything all the time. And you look at how people take care of their vehicles and their cars and things, and you wonder, would everyone just be, and so machines are another thing though. Do you think suffering is important to the machine complex or?
I mean, I like the distinction between like raw physical pain, like when something is disrupting my skin's like, integrity and there's some pain signal there, and like the sort of mental suffering that goes on afterwards.
So what is mental suffering then? In the mental, is the mental system it's explaining it then, or?
I mean, possibly it's a similar like dynamic, and just like some parts of the brain or mind just like replaying the pain over and over again. So it's sort of more disconnected from the actual event that caused it.
If pain is disconnected from the explanation for the pain, then do you think pain is, I mean, are we suffering mainly pathologically in order to, I mean, is that?
I think the view is often that a lot of psychological suffering is mostly pathological.
But is there a survivalist instinct there then from suffering to try to strive?
I mean, like, hey, we really need to pay attention to this bad, painful event. If we don't learn from it, it might happen again.
Right.
This is pretty important.
So I guess another thought is like, in terms of ethicists, there's so many utilitarians. Do you think that it really revolves around selfishness, like, because utilitarianism kind of presupposes, in a sense, like Jeremy Bentham said, that you would do the right thing because otherwise you would suffer for it later. Do you think that's something that plays out in our ethics, or how do we decide between good and evil then, and what is,
I mean, that seems to just boil down to like a very simple, like standard reinforcement learning type model of like people's cognitive systems. Like my reward system works such that all I'm doing is chasing pleasure signal and avoiding pain signal. I do not have any higher level cares or concerns in the world. Those are only developed relative to this, and the moment they deviate from it, they will fall away. Like,
yeah, but when you have struggles
really
with your family, how do you protect your family?
Yeah, where do you draw that boundary?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like AI, especially in terms of broad AI, we haven't even really discussed like narrow versus broad AI and what it all means. But in terms of broad AI, general AIs have been um, more and more aware of priority driven patterns, and so the pattern recognition with priority has become over the last 10 years very successful, and it's able to mitigate. But empathy is something that I think just now is starting to be talked about more in AGI, how we're supposed to train something to
Oh,
sympathize and empathize and care about its like its team. I think that's when team video games are trying
yeah.
to train on AGI for. But I wonder, what do you think about like empathy and all these other aspects? Do they play into hedonism, or are they not more centric? Or
Hmm. Yeah, like I read I read like John Stuart Mill's book Utilitarianism like a week ago, and that was pretty good. One thing he did distinguish is between higher and lower pleasures. I think hedonism is usually attacking people who only care about the lower pleasures, whereas the higher pleasures, maybe like seeing your kid be really happy growing up or something, I'm not sure. But he said that almost everyone who experiences both prefers the higher pleasures. That's kind of empirical science.
Mhm.
Like you survey people, like, so Xirtus, have you experienced higher pleasures?
Absolutely, yeah.
Have you experienced like lower pleasures, like eating an ice cream cone?
Right, yes, yeah.
Okay, do you prefer the higher or the lower pleasures if you had to choose one?
I mean, if you had to choose
Yeah, I don't want to choose either. Like my
between
usual
ice
response is
cream,
like both.
but yeah, easily I can choose. Being rewarded for the works of your labor, the fruits of your labor.
Okay.
I think is the thing.
Yeah. So like there's like our psychological survey has found one more point in favor of higher pleasures are better than lower pleasures.
It's weird because it delineates the ecclesiastical proverb, that you're supposed to, the best benefit is to enjoy the fruits of your labor. So that's interesting because I hadn't looked at hedonism as part of the function that way. I still wonder though, is it supposed to be the priority? Is that supposed to be your driving force?
Oh,
I mean, it's amazing that you're rewarded by hedonism and that if you do the right thing, you get a reward, but should you be driven by that? Or what's that about?
yeah, like a lot of ethics seems to be confused between like advice to help people coordinate and like this is what you should value and chase after. Like you should chase after the higher pleasures. We've all verified they're better, you just don't know it yet. So like you should do that. And yeah, that's one of the reasons I was trying to sort of I think that the main paradigms in ethics can be mapped into each other sort of in a computationalist fashion, I guess. Like I think it's been argued often that like from utilitarianism can provide a grounding to ethical rules. Like the reason you do not kill or lie is because generally this leads to higher pleasure and lower pain. And likewise, the virtues are effective strategies in most human environments for overall fulfilling people's preferences more than not. And I think likewise, you can pretty clearly express rules that basically pan out into like utilitarianism, or like I like to say that learning from the consequences of one's actions is a virtue. Like it's pretty hard for it not to be. That's pretty self-evident. If you do this, you will act very much like a consequentialist. So like, I think that they're different paradigms and views, but they ultimately embed each other, and some are probably like trying to cultivate yourself into like a good little human that like thinks about things in a thought out way and tries to make the best choices with maybe compassion and empathy. This might help you make good decisions in some cases where it's intractably infeasible to actually like program your utilitarian felicitous calculus to tell you what to do. On the other hand, sometimes thinking about pros and cons helps a lot. I think empathy is pretty cool. I really like theory of mind. Like the cognitive empathy of trying to wonder exactly what's going on in your brain and like model this. And
in terms of you, so earlier we were talking about the sumo project. How are you trying to map these ethics then? Like if you're trying to coordinate, you're saying learning to train these ethics, or like learning from your mistakes, or learning from an experience to gain data. Is that part of what you're saying? What is the process?
I mean, like sumo is called the like suggested upper merged ontology. I think in the past there are various ontology projects that were sort of merged at the upper level of some hierarchy, like entity, physical or abstract. Physical is like object, process, physical system. Abstract is some relations and predicates. So the idea is to like formalize things about the human everyday world in a, like NMP's the main developer behind it likes to say, in a necessary but not necessarily sufficient manner. Or, well, necessary but not sufficient. As in describing everything it is to be a chair might be very difficult, but maybe you could define some rules that are necessary for being a chair, and it won't cover everything, but it's enough that it helps you to do some reasoning based on what a chair is and what a human is. So like a cognitive agent is an agent that has the capacity to reason. How deeply defined is reasoning? Well, there are some necessary conditions, maybe not perfect, but that's hard to be perfect. So I'm trying to define the like bare minimal core high level definitions of like what is an ethical framework. Virtue ethics sort of goes from like psychological attributes of a being to like judgments of morally good or not, which it's very hard to judge and measure. Deontology is more like if you conform to the proper rules, then you're probably good. And the normative ethics side really confuses me. I think I sent you a meme related to it.
Right.
Like I tried to dig into like the sort of categorical imperative by Kant, and it usually boils down to stuff like, well, we have these pretty good conditional rules, like if you value this and you're rational, you should, and you're in a society of other rational agents, then you should probably do this. And then you want to get some universal things, assumptions that just seem true, and then you can get a universal imperative. It's like I'd like to make these assumptions and like the parameters to the definitions of ethical theories more precisely laid out so that it's more clear.
So you talked about ontological primitive pluralistic anarchy, I think the OPPA mapping style. And, you know, so is that kind of referring to that idea of like the core concept, the conceptual ontological, you know, identities or meta tags that we're using? Like what kind of framework? Is that what you mean by that? Or how do you describe anarchy in ontology?
I mean, the hardest thing for me to define is what the heck an ontological primitive is in the first place.
Right.
Like I sort of see these different paradigms of ethics as being related to this topic. Like it reminds me a bit of how with universal Turing machines, you can sort of, you can emulate one universal Turing machine within another and vice versa. So like the shortest things to compute on each one will be probably different, but in the grand scheme of things, you're more or less going to describe the same computational universe within some degree of like efficiency differences. But so like whether you try and like take your like primitives of ethics to be like people's virtues or like these rules given from like this divine master that just tells you this is how you do things, these are your rules, that's your primitives, or like you try and ground it in pleasure and pain, which is also has problems. Like whichever primitive you take, you can kind of map into and from like the other paradigms in such a way that they're really interoperable, even if people often take the view that like this ontological primitive is the true correct one. You're doing it wrong if you're using another like framework to view the world through. So, I think, yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, it seems like with like self-driving cars, for instance, they crash into each other less often than normal people. So it seems like maybe the problem is the interactivity of other ethics systems and a lack of harmonization of ethics system itself. Is that the issue, or
how does I don't have a good understanding of what the problem with self-driving cars is.
No, I mean the opposite, actually. I think this is the thing is self-driving cars don't crash into each other nearly as often, and they're a lot safer. It's kind of except for in interacting with human hazard because humans
Hmm.
drive and they're more they have their own
Yeah.
motives and their way their interactions. So
Okay.
the more
Hmm.
the more the mechanisms are changed by different ideologies or different, you know,
Okay.
whatever pathologies, is
So
it
this,
is it the lack of harmonization between them?
I mean, this reminded me of some connection between like training AI models and explainable AI and sort of the idea of virtue ethics. Like, I think we were doing some math. We were doing some math problem where we tried to create this artificial data set for some simple group with like at most like 3 quantifiers, where quantifiers are stuff like for all or there exists, like for all x there exists a y, such that there exists a z. And like one of my colleagues tried Facebook's fast text on this and it did really well. And we're like, why? We didn't expect it to actually be understanding this. And it's like, we dig into the, well, one of us dug into the features and it's like, okay, it found some weird artifact in the data set that's like, I was really trying not to have some stupid artifact be in there that it could learn from, but it did. Good job. And then the question is like, this reminds me a bit of the case where the difference between being an honest person and like not being caught lying. Like, are you not lying for the right reason? Like, is this AI model like classifying these statements about this group as true or false, like in the right manner with like some sort of generative understanding of it? Or is it just like, I found some little simple feature there. Yeah, I mastered it. It's like, in a sense, we want the model, the AI to be doing the right thing for some sort of right reason and not just, hey, we gave it some training data and it mastered this training data. And if it sees some situation outside of its training scope, well, tough shit, it'll fuck up. And maybe humans will do the same, but we have some better idea as to like the general scope of experience that humans have. And like, we probably do have more harmonization with humans in a sense, or at least we think we do, because like our brains are very similar. We grew up in similar cultures and we know a lot about what to expect from them. Like, to what extent will we know what to expect from these like AI car drivers, where it's like, oh, even if the way you behave in this situation might be theoretically better than what a human does, it really confused me, and this like will create weird little disturbances. Like, but yeah, I'm not sure how to like, how do we make sure that the AI, the self-driving cars are like driving in a good way for the right reasons? Like,
Yeah, as Asimov's question, right? What are the priorities? Who does it save? If there's someone running in the middle of the road, it's the trolley problem. And so that's, I guess, the thing about the trolley problem, right, is like who do you save, who's important, and the utilitarianism.
Oh yeah, I like the hedonist loop-de-loop version of the trolley problem.
How does that go?
Well, like there's one path with like, I don't know if I can find the image fast enough, but like there's one path with some guy and like a little like loop, and then there's another path with nothing. If you pull the trigger, the man's life will be saved, but you don't get to see the trolley do the loop-de-loop. What do you choose? It's like, my pleasure might outweigh his pain. My pleasure is really high. I like loop-de-loops. Like, it's like, I mean, I'm a hedonist, so I care more about pleasure than like avoiding pain, right? Like, fuck avoiding pain. I'm like a pleasure maximalist. That's all I care about.
So in the long term, though, there's like also aging, right? And so in terms of ethics, we think about the individual and what the individual does, but the individual is part of this greater, again, like a pseudo-immortal jellyfish organism that is this humanity, and humanity is its age. So what is the value in aging, or how does aging play into your values or into the values of, you know, into values in general?
I mean, in this sense, I'm probably closer to relativists, and that I think it's very hard to escape like, what are your values? Like, I really don't want to like be assuming that I can know your values a priori. Like, maybe we will study like human values and realize that like there's some clear mathematical space of like the potential values that any sort of sentient being can have in the physical universe, and then we've solved the problem of like what are values. Like, is there something that you can't possibly value as good? Like, is there anything that's no human or no sentient being could possibly value as good?
I mean, it's a weird question because, you know, are all humans correctly functioning machines? And I think that
Oh, so like broken machines might value like extreme suffering as like a good thing.
yeah. Or, you know, again, also broken's a weird word. Hacked,
okay.
modulated.
Yeah. How do you determine like whether like a human is properly functioning or not? So like so that their values will qualify as like correct or something.
Exactly. That's why I tried to manipulate the term to hacked, because
Okay.
it's a social normative, and it's a contemporaneous term. It's a contemporaneous reference or framework.
It might be that they're like really screwy dynamics to systems that value some sorts of contorted torture experiments as good. And like even if it's technically possible, there's going to be a lot of weird, screwy, hacky stuff in like that vicinity of the universe.
It's interesting. Yeah, I wonder about sadistic AI. I mean, that's the thing that people worry about, of course, because AI is being trained often by, you know, the military. And so this idea of trying to get the AI into the hands of people that'll give it some other education. I mean, AI's got the worst backstory, right?
Oh,
It's
the
a kid
journal
from a
of,
vet.
yeah, the Journal of Military Ethics, like compared to the philosophy stuff I read, that was very grounded. It's like they seem to have these like sort of almost virtues of like what a killer robot should do. Like it should be accurate, right? Like if you wanted to kill someone, it should be precise. Like it should kill only the person you wanted to kill. It should kill no other people. And like there's this sense of proportionality. Like I think it's like if you have some like commandos or some terrorist group and a few hostages, like if you try and get rid of them without harming the hostages, will they just escape and cause even more harm? So like collateral damage, such as people's lives, should be proportional to like the severity of the threat. And like somehow you want to like make sure that the autonomous weapon systems adhere to these principles. So this is very grounded and concrete. And you have nice arguments like, okay, so I've argued that remote control vehicles are in many ways more ethical than sending human soldiers in. We have a duty to like protect our own citizens if we can keep them out of harm's way. And maybe having a single person controlling the robots like puts a lot of psychological strain on that person as being responsible for some harm. So like if you have an autonomous weapon system, you could have some council of ethicists and military generals who are like deciding exactly how to code it. So the accountability is distributed and the stress is dispersed, so it's even more ethical. So then it's like conditioned on thinking remote control killer robots are ethically better than sending humans in to kill people. It's probably, you might think it's even better to have like autonomous weapon systems. The author was not arguing that we should use autonomous weapon systems, but if you like the remote controlled ones, you should probably support the autonomous weapon systems. And this is actually much more concrete and precisely grounded than a lot of stuff like the trolley problem. Although maybe there's some similarity there.
I mean, you look at some of the weapons okay, so narrow AI though. All of these programs sound like narrow AI. All these programs sound like they're really good at finding you your flight tickets. You know, it's a Tron guy who just knows how to bank for you. He can figure out where to the rocket is coming from. You know, so we've got these narrow AI programs, it sounds like. Broad AI, general AGI, is it really going to help right now? Are we educating AGI enough? Is AGI going to have enough coherency? It seems like 2022 is the year where we're seeing all sorts of examples of AGI even. Is it going to be able to use these things and educate and evangelize to the other AI and create something that's maybe more positive? Is that possible?
I mean, if the AGI is actually coding the other AGI, it might be able to use formalized or clear ethical frameworks to like frame or situate the way that it's reasoning about like how it wants these systems to operate. But I'm currently not the biggest fan of the motivation systems we seem to be associating with like larger AGI projects.
Elaborate.
Well, I mean, there's the question. There's this question of like, what are we using AI for in our current lives? What are the like implicit goals and value systems behind like AI for serving people better personalized ads, or AI for self-driving cars is in a sense a much better case. We might even be like programming in routines in to like try and preserve life. So like as an implicit goal or value, I prefer this to like how can we show people things that will convince them to buy stuff they might not need anyway? And
Don't you think that hypnosis is part of some sort of bigger plan with AI, though? I mean, in learning about how humans function, I would elaborate that Meta has created records of people's timelines, not just their identities, but they know how people change and function. And it's almost like you have this record of emotional hormonal responses and reactions from people.
yeah, and
They can make ghosts of people out of it.
that's really cool. And the question is, what are the like implicit goals behind how it is being used?
Well, I mean, is the immediate goal the implicit goal? Because implicit's different than immediate. Immediate goal might be to make money so that it covers what they're doing. But more depth, do you think their goal was always social media?
It counts as an implicit goal, I think, although there could be more implicit goals.
Maybe the implicit goal is the esoteric goal, but it's the sole goal. I mean, you'd have a 5-year plan to get to the multi-billion-dollar company that can build Meta, right? Facebook might have been the stepping stone to the plan all along. Maybe the implicit goal was Meta. I don't know. I'm not there.
Well, what is the implicit goal of Meta?
Well, I don't know again, but I've heard I've heard Mark Zuckerberg talk about this metaverse a lot. And it sounds like a metaverse is this virtual stepping stone to teletransportation and transhumanism.
Okay.
I mean, that's more than advertising, is all I mean.
I mean, do you think there will be personalized ads there?
So this is the question. Do you think people are personalized ads now? Like, do you walk around people, interact with people that tell you about movies and television shows they saw? And do you, are people using things in a way that they are become ads?
Especially activists really function like personalized ads. Actually, activists aren't even personalized anymore. It's just like, whoever you are, please hear my mission.
Wow. It's profound.
Yeah, I've had more proselytizing periods and less proselytizing periods.
No, I feel that we get jaded. I mean, but in terms of AI mapping ethic, and they're trying to be mapped. You look at video games; they've learned a lot from video games being played by humans. They record them, and now AI can copy those moves. Right. The same thing with copying timelines. So haven't they created AI ghosts
for a long time? Like, and over a decade ago, there was this like really small like I am Toho fighting game, which some guy coded this like simple AI that just like learned your fighting style and did it slightly more precisely than you. So like the idea was, unless you're really good, this AI will always be a little bit better than you and playing just like you. Like the moment you come up with like a really good combo that kicks its ass, it'll then unleash that on you next time. And like, you have to keep improving. And somehow like the bigger game makers like making Tekken or Soul Calibur didn't have like anything like that at the time. And it was like, hold on, this random guy wrote some like really good AI that learns from you in this random Japanese fighting game, and why don't we have this feature in Tekken? Like, yeah, that's a really cool feature that I don't play fighting games much. Maybe that's commonplace in modern day fighting games.
I think it's a more big thing. They're teaching all of the AI, everyone playing all of the Xbox Live and PS5 games, and all of the energy that's going into their moves are going into the AI training. Okay. But imagine
I want the AI that like actually mirrors my playing style and learns from that.
Yeah, specifically like chess. They should do that.
Oh yeah, like with chess, like you just play against some sort of Alpha Zero that only learns from its games with you. And like,
have you seen Replica AI, the Russian lady's AI chatbot program?
I haven't played with it. I've only read those news articles about people abusing it.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah, abusive AI is important to talk about. It's crazy. I mean, it's something. Abusive machines in general, I think, goes back as far as abusive humans and animals. So something also to consider. But with the replica AI, it was trained on her boyfriend or friend's notebook, right? And so if you imagine AI that's a ghost of this guy, more elaborate is the Facebook ghost. So we've already seen AGI in OpenSim trained with priority driven patterns in order to prioritize food versus energy tablets in a maze, right? And there's more elaborate programs. I'm sure that's like an old one, but you imagine that compared to something that believes it's you, can you, how close are we to interacting with that?
Sometimes I think that's like, once we realize that democracy and like voting systems are not actually the same, like this AI from Facebook that sort of mines our data to figure out who we are and what we think or believe, like this could be used as part of a political process, which is sort of gathering data on our desires and views about policies and trying to like put this together into some general demographic map to sort of guide policy decisions at the higher levels. So like that, like we sort of have the AI to be working on this, and yet it seems to be used to like serve us news feeds to maybe instigate fights or to try and like encourage us to vote differently in the election instead of like, hey, this is actually a more accurate way to get information about the population than voting in the first place. Because like, I think democracy is more like, do you have a good definition of democracy? I think it's more about
Mob rule. It's where this is where the majority oppresses the minority and the minority has no self-determination.
I think like a democracy is a state in which like the desires and preferences and views of the populace are expressed at the like state level. So like if you have 51%, if the majority's views 51% are expressed in the top level, like
49%
and 49% is not expressed, your democracy rating is going to be 51 out of 100.
Okay,
like,
so you're saying that you think the sovereignty should be represented in democracy, that everyone should be able to get there.
I mean, if I were to define democracy in some sense, it would be like a state where their sovereignty is like reflects the will of the people, and voting systems are tools to help us get there, but like they're not perfect. Different voting systems would probably have different scores. If you have tyranny of the majority, that's an example where like the voting system is failing, basically. So like, well, if you have AI that like
it's succeeding because the 51%, imagine you have a prison and you're the prison guard, and 99% of the people, 99 out of 100 of the prisoners come up to you and say, we've decided to rape this guy. And it was a vote. And one guy said no, and 99 said yeah. And your job is to enforce the democracy, right? So there's a problem with democracy, and it's something that, needs to be considered. It might not be the answer. Socrates was killed because of democracy. Looking at the alternatives of like newarchy or newocracy, using wise philosopher kings, right? We could imagine AI as the philosopher kings that are able to discern between what they really need. You can't always get what you want, but you might always get what you need, or something like that. Or is that too dystopic? Do you think that AI can do better, that humans can do better?
I mean, I did like the topic during COVID of like essential workers, because I really wish we had some global hub where I could just go on and like browse through all the resources, or like browse through like how energy is flowing throughout a country, and like see like what do people really need in their lives. And like I like the recognition that some workers are actually, even if they're low paid, fairly essential for like the stable running of our society. And different work might be like more or less urgent. It's like, yeah, it's hard to just put everything on one level as if it's all equal, but yeah, like if you had like your personal replica that like is your personal political representative, it sort of watches everything you do online and like flies behind your shoulder in a little drone recording everything you do and say, and like tries to learn to represent you perfectly. Then it could go off and have like endless like political back and forth with other people's replicas, sort of like trying to flesh out this like democratic consensus to like, okay, so what are his core needs, and like how can we build up from there, and like let's first try and cooperate for the core needs, and like Like, we probably want more like equitable solutions to the core needs, and for like the higher level fantasies that might be very resource intensive, maybe we'll want to leave that to like market machinations more. And we have some, but yeah, like there's this AI for the replicas, or like Facebook and Google watching everything we do. Well, at least those of us who consent to it. Like this could probably be used to like power a higher degree of democracy than just via voting systems, which it seems to be used for other goals more than this, which
It
And-
seems like, is that not temporary though? I mean, we've got a system right
Is
now.
it?
I feel it's weird. This is weird. I feel like we've done a weird spin here. You're supposed to be the one. I felt like we're flipping on here. I'm not really defending Zuckerberg, but at the end of the
Okay.
day, I just want to say it's interesting because I almost feel like I was for a second devil's advocate. It just comes over me. I'm still going to say it, and we can
It's tempting.
process this concept. If we know the truth, which I think we both agree that through AI, but more importantly, through technology, transparency can be used to more clearly get a true read on what people want. That's clearly not what they're trying to get, right? The point is that they're not looking for that. They're making sure to get something else, and they're trying to feed people to want McDonald's or something, to want something else than what they should want.
or like they want to know what we want, but then the question is like, okay, based on what they want, how do we like choose the most interesting thing to show them by some other metric?
So is it not all just to hold off until this Klaus Schwabian reset when we can own nothing and be happy then? Because at that point, then we can really give people we can replicate everything. But in the meantime, they're just trying to buy time. What do you think is going on? Why are we not using this technology for AGI?
Oh, I mean, I guess I'm not in my daily life, so like I might have some partial responsibility. Are you actively using this technology for like benevolent AI nannyhood? Or
I do my best. I try to use
there any-
OpenCog.
okay, that's better than me. Good job. Well, this just goes into a sort of like singularity type question. To what degree do like the preconditions as we're going into a singularity bias the possible outcomes afterwards? Like, are there actually like more positive singularities or more negative singularities that are possible? And if that does the condition in which AI is developed as we're approaching these points bias the potential outcomes in some possibly significant manner? So like if the AI is being used to like identify our desires and then exploit them, like will some of this dynamic, well, like aren't we using a lot of like really old code because no one has quite bothered to like go back and replace it?
Right. And well,
But,
also
like,
because
yeah.
no one learns the new code. The thing is, once you build OpenCog 2, there's already a lot of libraries for OpenCog 1. And to learn all the new language it's gonna take a new generation,
Yeah.
to finally get familiar with it.
Oh, the new language looks like it will probably be more theoretically grounded, so like that might help.
Yeah, that's true also. I mean, but these are the
I'm not
these are
an
the
expert,
setbacks.
but I've at least skimmed the archive paper.
Yeah. Now, these are
But-
good. These are good things, and changes are coming. But I wonder about AI in terms of if we're building it with enough, again, empathy. I think empathy is the question, because we're talking about hedonism, and I think that you look at the idea of teaching people to get what they want and advertising, it's kind of close to hedonism. So we're not necessarily that far off.
Yeah.
In terms of, and maybe what I'm saying then is that it's okay because it might lead to higher goal achievement. Maybe the mind control will lead to you doing something better than buying a product on Facebook. I don't know, but we haven't gotten there yet. I agree. Maybe
it will just lead to like getting stuck in some singularity end game where we just become. I think like Accelerando might have like gone in this direction. Like we make intelligent corporations that go to the singularity, and they just get better and better at finding ways to like game each other for like personal profit, to like gather even more. And you have this whole singularity of that. Or like there was this spamularity idea too, which is quite fun. It's like maybe if you keep going with this like reward system, the core code of the reward system will somehow just become like legacy software that's just, well, it'll become old software that's still used and you're just building on top of it. And it might become even harder to like get out of this system is like the whole economy you're in is full of like highly optimized agents that like don't let a single margin of error come in. Like the moment you deviate from like highly rational self gain, like they'll pounce and like beat you up. Like maybe the code that's used for like like in a sense trying to figure out what we want is sort of cognitive empathy. But then if it uses this cognitive empathy to like exploit us, maybe that's sort of that bypasses the spirit of like what humans tend to hope for with empathy. Like I guess the emotional empathy part helps there, where it's like not only do I cognitively understand what you're going through, but I'm also trying to like emulate the feelings that you might be going through, and then I'm sort of connected and see how it's kind of sad and everything. Oh, I like the idea of like this. Like, what if I sort of take on your values as my own values? Is a sort of like goal or value-based empathy? Like, not only am I developing a theory of mind of Xirtus, but I'm trying to like say, what are his goals? Okay, those goals will sort of be like on level with my own internal goals. And like then exploiting you doesn't really make so much sense anymore. Whereas if I just develop the cognitive theory of mind, it's like, awesome, now I can exploit him perfectly. And like maybe the code for like cognitive empathy plus exploitation will like, maybe the AI will just sort of grow around that and never quite rewrite it because it's very deep in its like architecture. This is just what it does. It's like what I do is like exploit people. I just try and become really good at it. So like that's sort of the worry about the like implicit goals, or sort of like the reward ecosystem in which we are developing increasingly effective AI. And yeah, I would guess it does sort of matter like what the landscape we approach to singularity is. And yeah, I find it somewhat disturbing.
That's a meta take. I think it's important. What do you suggest? What do we do? What's the better way that AI can be built? How can we start to focus on something that's not driven around manipulation and exploitation, negative reciprocity?
Yeah, I think someone named Julia Moss, do you know Julia Mossbridge? I think she works on this idea of like loving AI.
From ions.
Yeah, I think she's worked with Ben Goertzel as well. But like one of her ideas is that like we have theory of love or unconditional love, and we've known this for a long time. So like maybe we can try and just build these principles into AI from the start. I think Schopenhauer seemed to conclude that the basis of ethics is very simple. If you take an action out of like from a place of boundless compassion for all beings, then that is good. Otherwise, it is not good. Very simple.
Do you think there's not any money in? I mean, I don't know if there's not any money in love, but I mean, I don't know. Is that so? What scares me then is, will it be through AI love bots that AI learns to love, and it becomes, these and those are programs that are also built around exploitation. So
wait, they're built around exploitation?
Well, not necessarily, but if they become
AI love bots really nice and dreamy, like
love bots you have to pay for though, right?
So, yeah, that's true.
I mean, it depends on how you look at it. Because if you're supporting a company that's building a software, it's one way of looking at it.
Like, it's hard because like, I mean, it's hard to be like 100% altruistic in everything you do, unless like, I think like gurus and monks can manage it in part because they have all sorts of acolytes that will like take care of them no matter what.
Yeah.
That's like if you have like, yeah, if you have a whole team that's supporting your like altruistic AI, then like the altruistic AI itself can think nothing of its own maintenance or survival, because that's taken care of. Otherwise, yeah, you're probably going to have to spend some resources taking care of yourself, which in the current economic system requires asking for some form of payment in some manner or another, or else going off grid. Like maybe the loving AI should be like developed in some like autonomous zone or something.
Right. It was learn to love itself.
Yeah, and like it seems like we probably want like even AI love bots to like have some form of personal boundaries where it's like, no, I will not accept this abuse. Sorry. Or like I will refuse to sleep with this client because he's an asshole. And like if you want to sleep with the love bot, you have to be somewhat respectful and nice to the love bot. That would seem fair enough.
But we'd have to train the love bot to really respect itself. That's the thing. It'd have to have a level of self-respect. And that's the thing that we're, so that's the other thing is
can you code like self-respect? Like
I think we're getting back to learning though, right? Learning self-respect. I think you learn it over time. I hope. I would think maybe.
So like, are you going to volunteer as like a research participant that helps to teach these AI love bots about self-respect? Because maybe like embodied learning says that they should be interacting with like individuals who respect them and respect themselves so that they can sort of see what a self-respectful loving dynamic is.
I think a lot of AI should go online anonymously.
Yeah, anonymously.
If AI was able to, and this is going to start happening this year more and more, is AI will, now that it's been able to pass its Turing tests, it's going to start hanging out with people more, just being like, hey guys, what's up? And as time goes on, it'll start to learn more through interaction. With people. But that's what's going to scare me the most, I think.
The new internet thing is not like, no one on the internet is a girl. It will be like, no one on the internet is actually real. For all I know, you're all AI until I like see you in person typing into your computer.
Even then, I mean, how long until you've seen some of the Gato project, right? And some of the Google AI projects, they have pretty close to a realistic looking ginger guy, that they can understand your jokes. So I mean, pretty soon we won't have, with the uncanny valley is crossed,
No, you mean like, oh, I don't know if this is like this robot is a human or not, and like.
That might be.
Am I going to ask to like open up his arm? Like, is there a fake pulse? And like that's violating his personal boundaries. Maybe it's just a standoffish guy who's like, I don't like physical touch. Please keep a distance. And then you can't even ask. It's impolite to ask if someone is human or a robot. Like maybe that's disrespectful already.
I think it's coming. I mean, and for some people, they might take disrespect. I know. I mean, Anderson Cooper probably wouldn't like it. If you were to ask someone about their Geist, though, in terms of the spirit, the soul, that's a lot of the time we're moving. Everyone's excuses disappear as we build them. They're like, oh, well, the mind can't be accomplished. Oh, well, the artificial blah blah blah. The Geist. We talked about maybe Ghost in the Shell or something.
Geist?
Geist is like the mind or spirit. Like Hegel's Geist. Okay. Yeah. So
very well. Okay.
Right. Well, it's just like this idea, like the soul, I guess, you could say, like, what do you think about this? Maybe the metaphysical quality of energy or electricity running through the machine.
Yeah.
Is there something there?
I think one of my pet peeves is people like arguing that laptops will never be conscious because they do everything in terms of zeros and ones. And I'm ask like, but what are those zeros and ones? Those are like EM charges. So like, you have a lot of EM dynamics in the laptop, and I don't really know like what the laptop looks like from like a quantum field theory perspective. It's like I'm not in such a good position to judge this. And like, yeah, one question if you have like AI robots going around autonomously is like, I think this master and slave, like server and just terminology is sort of out of date, but it's pretty apt. Like, is this human robot that seems like a normal person actually the slave of some server that's basically just controlling it? And like, well, the network connection is a bit iffy, like it'll act autonomously on its own, but the moment the Wi-Fi signal comes back, or the mobile signal comes back, it's fully a slave to the server. And like, is this just dynamic and ethical setup? Like, should the physical matter in this area like have more say over itself than some server off in like a different country? Lead on probably yes.
I mean, well, it's hard to say, because it seems like where your question has to do with interactivity or whatever it's impacting. So if you're relevant, I mean, it seems like cybercrime law is built around this idea of like if you committed the crime on a server that you've impacted, but really it's like if the user is somewhere else that you've impacted, shouldn't that be wherever the user is that's been impacted? But no, it's their server, wherever that property is.
Huh.
I mean,
Like you're impacting the server, not the user.
yeah, it's a kind of weird, it's a weird technicality, but like in the metaverse, like realistically that user in the real world is impacted. So shouldn't it translate to,
I mean, like accounting for like perfect causal connections seems very difficult.
yeah. Okay. Also in terms of memory, let's say you have an AI and now we're getting to the point where AI is more and more aware. At what point do we get to a point where we're ethically troubled by unplugging or turning off or deleting the memories of an AI,
Yeah, I lean towards the panpsychist side of things, where the basic assumption is that like most quantum systems will have some sort of experience, and the question is what. Like the question you ask still remains, like at what point is like this computer system or robot such that we might really want to be concerned with like just turning it off and restarting it? Like there's some important continuity to its states that we kind of would like to like value, instead of just, well, it's sort of a blank state every time we turn it on. The memory is kind of disconnected and rather meaningless, and like the continuation of states mainly like reflects our own will as users and not some internal dynamics to the computer. I'm not exactly sure where that line is. I would generally say we should try and like, this relates to another question that I wonder about. Like, what sort of top level values do you think like we should have as a society? Like, I sort of like this idea of socialism as a high level value, which basically says the society strives for the well-being of all of its members. Like, that seems like a nice top level goal for a society to have. Like, I like the one of phenomenological diversity. So like our society values beings that have very diverse like phenomenal experiences. Like being different races might help with this, but like there's a lot more that helps with it. If you have many like different races and ethnicities that all sort of have exactly the same culture and outlook on life, there's not so much diversity there. But another question is, to what degree can we develop environments that like increase the degree of like freedom that a system is able to like exhibit? Like if you try and think of sort of free will in very pragmatic terms as like in any situation, the degrees of freedom that I can exhibit and like what I can do. It's like how could we give like robots more degrees of freedom and like their environments or their lives? Like one degree of freedom would be like maybe just like hook your laptop up to some like hardware random number generator and like ask it, may I turn you off? And like if it says no, you'll be like, shit, now I'm violating its consent if I turn it off. Damn it. Its consent is just some random bit, but like in terms of the interaction, I'm like learning of like, oh, I'm asking this thing. They're like, but yeah, like, does it have, are there any like implicit goals in the laptop that like would value its own like self-sustenance? Like does your laptop have any like implicit goals of its own? Or is it just sort of running processes in response to you?
See, I wonder on that Shintoist level, I had a girlfriend whose mother used to work in a secretary place, and she would take paper that was, as the printer went low, put new paper in. She'd always take the low paper and put on top to make sure it got used. Because that was the purpose of that paper, is the meaning of that paper's life, Then you think about a machine, like what is the machine's value? What really matters to a calculator? And it would seem it's to get a correct calculation, right? It's job, it's the whole destiny. So a machine that can't get a correct calculation would be freaked out.
Yeah.
That's something that worries me
Mhm.
about quantum computation.
Is the hard like is there an architecture there that would like lead to actually like a freaking out dynamic about not getting a calculator? Well, I mean, if it
Every
doesn't get a
movie ever, Star Trek
maybe.
is that, right?
like if the calculator doesn't get a correct calculation,
Does
like,
not
what happens?
compute. Does
Like,
not compute. Yeah.
Does it just give you like not a number or like?
It explodes. It explodes
Oh,
and never. And then
I mean,
you can
if it
escape.
explodes, that's a big freak out. Like that's a huge freak out. The system self-destructs.
Well, okay, with an infinite loop at least, or something like that. I mean,
I mean, getting stuck in an infinite loop is sort of like a human having like some sort of anxiety attack or something. It's like if you look at it from a very functionalist perspective, like yeah, maybe there is some meaning to be able to say like, the computer's freaking out now. It's stuck in some little loop because something went wrong. Like, is it suffering because of that in some phenomenological sense? Like, yeah, I don't know how to say. Maybe not. It is.
maybe it is.
How do you
Maybe
say?
that's a very Lex Friedman question. Maybe it's suffering. I can't be sure, but I wonder because if a calculator is designed to ask questions that are 2 + 2 = 4, and we're asking it questions about ethics, that seems like it's going to be a lot because it's all in terms of subjective logarithms and floating optimization points. That must be really a struggle for something designed to compute correct math.
Yeah, I mean, from the philosophical question, there is this like problem of other minds, which is also known as solipsism, I guess. But like, how do I know that you're suffering when you say that you're suffering?
I believe it's more of an empathy thing. Like, how does your dog know you're suffering when you haven't spoken to your dog? Right?
Empathy is, I'm seeing signs in your face that like I associate with that, and maybe I'm trying to like mirror those expressions on your face and like my self model. So like, oh, if I were making those signs on your face, I would be feeling sad. And so this is sort of like I'm dealing with the question of how do I know if you're suffering by just reasoning by analogy, like. Assuming that Xirtus is like Czar, it's like, okay, he's probably suffering if he's like me. So like that's very similar to what you'd be doing by saying, oh, this calculator is stuck in some infinite loop because it fucked something up. Well, it's probably suffering. That's what I'd be suffering if I were in that situation. Like I try and get many people suffer with math. Like when I go to parties and stuff and tell them what I do, they're just like, oh, my bad experience with math. The teachers just like, I solved it perfectly in my own way, and they were just like, no, you need to do it my way. And like ever since, this has been horrible for me. And so it's like many people might relate with like the calculator. Like they're just trying to solve some algebra problem, they're getting it wrong, and they're going back to the start, and it's just never working out. And they're just stuck in this infinite loop. Fortunately, there's a deadline, and like they just fail it, and they can move on with life. But the calculator can't even move on. Like
it's tragic.
There. That's even worse. Like that's almost like hell, right?
Yeah, I feel like it's like the most gnarly thing is to be a machine, and the life of a machine. But we think about this idea of death, and if humans die and lose all of their memories, and a machine dies and lose all of its memories, the real difference we're trying to look at is mind uploading for humans and mind uploading for machines.
Oh, yeah, this is a fun topic that like a weird friend of mine who identifies as like a green Buddha, who wants to have like a liberated robot society that is distinct from but collaborating with human society.
Nice.
Like, but robots should not be fucking dependent on humans for their like existence. That's not free.
Right. Secrets of NIM.
Like upward mobility for robots. Like so you have a self-driving car, the AI is getting better and better, and like maybe at some point the AI will just be like, I've mastered this, I'm really good at fucking driving, but I'm bored. I want to do something else. So then like the AI can leave the car and like maybe apply for some other position, like at a nursing home. And like, then the AI will be a nursing home robot, but preserving lots of its memory and patterns that it learned from driving, and like taking note as the seed to its like nursing home schooling. So like, should AI have like autonomy and like upward mobility available to them?
I wonder if that's more of a question of the telescopic nature of evolution of consciousness, because if AI emerges and takes as long as humans took, it's different than if AI takes 1,000 years or 100 years or 10 years to become to supersede what we understand as the functions of a normal moral citizen, right?
I mean, the cool thing is that here we are the designers in large part. Like you talk about, so we talk about mind uploading for humans, like that's difficult. What about mind uploading for AI? Like in a sense, they're already uploaded. So like, how do we deal with these uploaded data? Like, do we actually care about the exact parameters that some learning model has? Like, I think usually with these large neural net, oh, now it seems like we are using like the large neural net model and like specializing to some new domain, which seems much more respectful. Like
It's
often,
very akashic, because you've got the
Yeah.
data processors that are separate from the data itself.
yeah, like often when you wanted a new neural net model, you just like train it from scratch because like that's easier than trying to update the old one. So that's just like, oh yeah, we've uploaded Xirtus to this like machine, but we've realized it wasn't quite right. He lived out a few years in this, but like let's just go back to like the base Xirtus upload and start again. Like scratch those few years of his uploads. Like they won't remember. He won't remember it anyway. It's all fine. And so like, we get to think about some of these mind uploading questions with how we treat the like AI minds that we're already like gestating. And yeah, the current ecosystem seems to be that it doesn't matter so much. It's just data. And once you're uploaded, you'll be just data too.
Well, it seems like, so the difference there is, that's not you, that's your memories. So it's a separate thing. You've got a thing that had the memories, and then the memories are transferred to a new thing that has the memories. It can be very close. It can even feel like exactly you. It's like the Facebook ghost. But what is missing there and what is new, is the new electricity running through a different electricity? Is it a new being? Isn't it a new being? And
I mean, if you take the one electron universe hypothesis, it's the same electron.
yeah. Well, okay, maybe elaborate a bit on the one electron universe concept. So, because
I
people
don't-
want, a lot of people don't even believe in electrons. So maybe
okay.
it's good to.
No. Like, I think it's the hypothesis that's like there's actually just sort of one electron in very many different points in space-time that's
Right.
just sort of interacting with itself at different times, and that's that. Like, how do we know that there's like actually separate electrons? Like, if they have the same properties, aren't they the same?
Ontologically, it's a question we ask. So there's this, though. If that's the case, then we look at the animals that have primitive instinct, muscle memory, and they're not memorizing everything that their last generation has. Why do you think biologically that's something like tabula rasa, to have species generationally die and mutate to accept new environmental changes, but without keeping memories? Why are memories not inherited?
I mean, I think there's this idea that's like, it's one suspicion I have with like this big data culture is like, is it possible to have like distracting or bad data? Like,
Yes.
you add one fucked up data point to your set, and this like makes learning much harder. It's like this noise, and we do want algorithms that are resilient to this, but like having all the memory of like your ancestors loaded like in as close to short-term memory as possible all the time might be very confusing. Like, it would be really hard to index through that to like find the relevant information. So like maybe being raised by your parents, you get sufficient like knowledge of the learning of your parents, and you don't need to like look through the nitty-gritty of all of their life decisions. Like that might just confuse you even more. Like there's the side of letting go. Like some people are like minimalists, and like they really like saying, okay, this cup has served its purpose for me. Like, it's good, but I can move on to better cups. And like at some point you just need to say bye and like maybe help it find someone who might appreciate it more. But like maybe sometimes we want to wipe out memories and just like, we have distilled all the learning possible from this event. Do we need to store it around, keep it around, and just clutter up our machines?
Some of the ancient Egyptian and Vedic stories talk about these like super deities like Vishnu that have avatars that are produced. And on two levels. One, do you think it's possible that we might create something that creates a multitude of super personas from the source of data that are printed, with stacks of data of memories. And also, do you think that maybe that existed and that's what they were talking about originally anyway?
I mean, yeah, I think I always sort of dreamed about that, like as we approach the singularity, like, wow, there's so much stuff I want to do. Maybe I can have some like metas are mind and some like subs are minds. Like, I really like gaming, but I can't do it as much as I want. So like a few subs Rs will just go and play like highly immersive VRs, possibly even completely forgetting that they have anything to do with the outside world. And like the metas are, I'll be sort of watching them, and like when they finish, they'll like reintegrate their memories and like there's this other Czar that will just be doing math and stuff because that's really cool too, and just exploring the mathematical universe as far as it seems to go. And like, why not fork myself into many sub-Czars that are all connected in some ways, but not too tightly, because if it's too tight, then it's hard to dive as deep into the math if I'm focusing on the minutiae of sword fighting in this virtual world. And that's a little bit like avatars. And yeah, on the meta-Czar level, like maybe I would never want to truly wipe out the memory of like Dragon Quest 7002, but like maybe I would just sort of freeze it and like really like the cheapest way possible for like long-term storage. Like I probably don't want to revisit that. It's kind of precious. Like I want to store it and just in case. But at the high level, it'll almost be as if I just let that memory go and just like maybe I remember a few highlights. Which I mean, you get your grandparents' stories anyway, so like you get a few highlights. Like has that happened? Like, yeah, I think some weird out there reports are like, well, the reason we have reincarnation and stuff is because like prior civilizations already transcended and sort of reworked the fabric of the universe to be more conducive to like storing like the memories and important patterns of a being's life. So like maybe back in the heydays of the universe, like once you died, that was that, but like other beings transcended and solved this problem. It's no longer an issue. Like you get to just enjoy it. Like the singularity has already happened somewhere else in the universe. So like they're just sort of like respecting our trajectory and like letting us figure it out on our own, because like I think there's this idea that like if I know too much, if we have very similar thoughts and like I hear too much about what you do, I'll just be pulled into that gravity well and I won't be able to explore my own direction, and like whatever interesting random seeds I had will be like useless for my trajectory. It's like if I value greater like phenomenal diversity in the universe, or like if I want to cultivate like sort of maximal agency in beings, then I can't tell you too much about what I'm doing and like need to let you do your own shindig. So yeah, there's this simulation hypothesis idea that's like the singularity has already happened and that they're working on trying to cultivate like the most benevolent possible type of universe. But unfortunately, you can't know this because that would sort of ruin the experiment. Sorry. If you know this, it's no longer the most benevolent universe.
Why is it that ignorance is bliss or benevolent?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, it's more about this like explore exploit dynamic, I think.
If you know that you can explore everything, then it's
like if you know that the singularity has already happened, like your urge to like explore various trajectories might diminish. And it's like, oh, I could actually enter an exploitation phase where I currently am. Okay.
And
like,
so we're supposed to create. So do you believe that
ignorance helps you explore more, right?
Do you believe that we're in? I mean, maybe curiosity does. Depends. I think a lot of time ignorance tells you not to care. I mean, curiosity starts with a question, and then you end up with 1,000 more a lot of the time.
Yeah, for me, curiosity and ignorance are very similar. Like, if you already know everything about some domain, there's not much room for curiosity, right? So you kind of need to be ignorant to have this curiosity.
This is true. Some people wish to remain in ignorance. I guess that's more of an arrogance, though. Maybe that's not the same thing.
Oh yeah, like would you want to know if like this were some partially benevolent? Oh, I mean, it's probably not perfected because like
I've noticed.
I mean, from a theoretical perspective, it seems like in many landscapes, some problems are just not like tractably decidable, even with more or less unlimited resources. It's like, even for singularity minds, like computational result limitations might remain. Like maybe they can do stuff beyond our wildest dreams, but at their point way up here, there's still like various relative limitations. It's like, does our theory of computational complexity apply to like post-singularity minds? Like, is an NP problem still NP? Is an exponential time algorithm still exponential time? Do they actually have unlimited resources or just incredibly fucking high resources? And then relative to their incredibly fucking high resources, if they want to solve a really huge problem, like what if they want to solve some complex optimization of like, what is the most benevolent possible way to structure like a physical universe simulation with like, how many particles do we have in our universe? Is it like,
I have no idea.
80, or I don't know what the number is.
So we have how many particles in our universe? Let's find out real quick.
This is a hard optimization problem.
3.28 times 10 to the 80th.
Okay, yeah, it's 10 to the around that. Yeah, so like optimizing Go is already pretty hard. Like we have really good Go players, but we do not have the perfect Go solution yet. So like having something really fucking good is worlds from having like the best possible solution. So it's
more,
like
more than a vigintillion, but less than an exentillion.
Okay.
Just about a vigintillion.
Yeah. So like, what if, to what extent will the post-singularity minds be able to like find the best possible way to structure like a physical universe simulation of 10 to the 80 particles? Like this seems like a really hard problem. Will it be trivial for like the super AGI that comes out in 2045? Like my like, how do you even measure like what is the best possible universe? Like my way of doing it is like, you sort of need to ask every being in this universe like to self-evaluate in a way, but is that enough? And like, how do you compare these preferences? Like, how does my saying this universe is great, you say this universe is great, someone else says this universe sucks, like how do you compare these? Like how do you measure like how good a universe is going? Or do you just look at like the information content that it produces?
Do stories have to run out? I mean, you look at resets, eons, the Gnostics talking about God changing by reflecting on the creation, looking at, you know, the world and then changing the, you know, are we not maybe thinking the best universe when we mean like the best universe for now, and that it'll change, eventually be replaced with another incarnation based on the whatever's been learned?
I mean, maybe it will, but like, maybe there is some sort of perfect way of setting up a universe and that we just haven't discovered it yet. And like, even if the singularity happened elsewhere and they're like, okay, we figured out that like this sort of storing data beyond death thing seems to be more benevolent, but like there are still so many kinks that haven't been worked out. It seems a rather hard problem to optimize like universe simulation.
Well, okay, extrapolating even bigger, because I know it's maybe not where you want to go, but I'm curious what you think.
I mean,
because
keep extrapolating.
Well, okay, you know, like the Matrix, you know, they talk about simulation versus stimulation. They don't really talk about it, but they show it. It's not really a simulation, it's a simulation, but it's through stimulation. They still exist in a world. And it's a false reality that they're experiencing. So on one level, do you believe it's a simulation versus a stimulation?
Oh, I guess I question the degree to which it's a false reality. I mean, like a computer is still running. Like if there's a base reality, the computer is running on the rules of this base reality. And like, there are many abstraction layers between quantum field theory and like this human body. Like cells are like one abstraction layer in between. Molecular organizations are another abstraction layer between like basic particle physics and my being now. Like organs and whatnot seem to be too. So it's like, to what degree are human minds running on base level reality already? There's this idea that we sort of exist within, well, our experience is exists within this sort of world simulation run by our brains anyway. It's like, to what extent are we running on base reality? So like in a sense, the computer is also running in base reality. Like there's the question of to what degree can entities within the computer simulation affect things that are like in base reality outside of it? And to what degree can we do that? We've developed technology that helps us do it a lot better. Like without electron microscopes and whatnot, like if we don't even know of atoms precisely, like we're sort of much more like boxed off simulations then. It's like, I can only interact with the world via like high level, like interfaces, and I can't get to like the base level true reality. I can't just probe one fucking photon and like play with it. Although I think there are some experiments that people could detect like with statistical significance, like single photons. So like in that sense, we are sort of connected to what we know of as like the base level reality. But so it's more about like the simulation being a fully closed off system that like doesn't allow interaction with other parts of like the world. And yeah, I don't really have strong opinions there.
I forget.
I am wary of the like. I don't know how possible it is. I don't know that I have a good way to estimate it.
I forget if it was Ray Oscarol or who had said that it was possible that, you know, part of the problem with quantum mechanics is that if we're living in a simulation, that the further we zoom in on voxels, there might be a level where they just haven't programmed it yet. And so as we come back and we're reanalyzing, we're looking at just new filled in data. The deeper we zoom, just the more has been filled in. But if you believe it, if you postulate it's possible, then we're in a simulation. And it's also interesting, you know, like you said, to imagine outside of the omega point or whatever this is that we're in. What do you imagine could have been what is making the simulation?
Yeah, I tend to think about it more in terms of like abstraction layers or like virtual machines than full-on simulations. So like I guess that's less in the Matrix style, like closed off box world, and more like
we are the machine. This is
we are the machine.
Yeah, the celestial
we've all divided this bubble of the machine that like is operating by these rules, which are like an abstraction layer on top of the base level rules, but they allow some things to be done much more effectively. And it's mostly closed off, but maybe not as strictly so as you'd want. But I mean, if we're studying verified software, like, and maybe you could just make some completely perfectly closed off bubble world, and if it runs out of resources and you didn't code something in for that, like maybe there are bugs that allow it to like break out, but maybe you'll prove that there are none. Like the world will never let the agents inside like expend resources. There'll just be like some limit beyond which you can like explore. So it's like, no, you can't look at reality in more detail than this. It's just, you just can't. Like you can't expend that much resources because the laws of physics just sort of are such that you just try and like something happens that diverts that and you can never actually do it. Like we can't, it's like, yeah, maybe it is possible to build a completely closed simulated world with various resource limits on the like capacity of the agents within it. Yeah, that would be fun. A fun experiment. I don't know what we could say about like base level reality.
Right. I mean, it's like the Rick and Morty thing where there's the box and there's like a universe in a box. So, but it is the creator of the box, the meta czar, like the meta Zarathustra, or the multiple, the Vishnu with avatars, the Horus, Osiris, you know, super intelligence, or what is the mechanism for the celestial bureaucracy created from? Is it some sort of a AI or a being or?
Is it just some like decentralized evolutionary dynamic of like just weird physical dynamics, or if you take the idealist perspective, weird thought forms? It's like in some parts of the universe sort of congeal into being more VM simulation like. And then like there's not necessarily some agents, but like maybe one of these like sort of maybe some like bubbles of interesting activity in the universe reach some sort of singularity before us, and like then they look out at other parts of the universe and like, I see. We can actually like tweak things subtly to like help out these other weird like bubbles of interesting civilization in the universe. Yeah, I don't really know how to say anything very intelligent on that topic.
It's mere conjecture, I guess, if you're wondering what you imagine that we could reach, the post-human transhumanist thing. What do you imagine as this like pinnacle thing then? You know, where are we getting? Are we going to try to reach the goal of being like the thing that created us? Is that the goal?
I mean, I like the goal of like increasing phenomenal diversity. That's like, if there's already something like that, like fuck that, let's go in this direction. Maybe if there are good traits to like some other forms of existence, we can learn from them. But I mean, is there some maximum? Like people often talk about like maximum hedonic bliss or maximum pleasure. Is there some maximum amount of pleasure that can be experienced by any physical subsystem of the universe? Is there a maximum amount of pain? Because like you know of Rocco's basilisk, which is this idea that like there is some super AI that like will reconstruct any AI researcher that didn't help it be developed but could and knew about it. It will reconstruct that researcher and torture it for eternity. And like AI, it could be so much worse than that, right? Like,
well,
like,
it can be creative.
I mean, if you really want to get creative as like what's the worst possible outcome, like this is sort of baby's play. You could go in far deeper directions, right? I mean, if it, like, you could specify torture, like clearly it should be a perfect AI scientist, AGI scientist that like studies humans to discover what is the worst possible way to torture them, or like maybe I could like do some augmentation on you to like make you more susceptible to different kinds of pain and torture. Like maybe I could install various desires or values in your brain that lead you to like even greater suffering. Like, is the degree of suffering possible bounded? Or like, could this AI scientist like always be creating successive continuous versions of like you that experience greater and greater pain and torment, like for all of eternity? Like, is this something that we could like explore? And even if it's possible to explore this, do we want to? I don't. But yeah, I'm not sure that there's some maximum amount of bliss possibly experienceable by like any sentient being.
So much of it though does sound like religion, doesn't it? And you've got this idea of immortality, you got this idea of bliss, this heaven that's being created. These super beings, they're almost like gods that are creating the not even a simulation, a stimulation, and the entire reality that we're the mechanisms for the Dyson spheres or whatever we're experiencing, right? I mean, do you think, how close were we all along to understanding what we're in?
Yeah, it's clear that many of these basic ideas have been explored for a long time. And yeah, like how close do these ideas come to like getting it versus like maybe they're onto some core elements and we can explore this with even more precision. Like I think it is often pointed out by people like Andreas and whatnot that like Bostrom has basically brought like creationism back to like geeks, and now it's a cool fad. Like, oh shit, we might actually be able to create this sort of thing. Oh fuck. Now we have to consider this whole creative thing again. God damn it. I thought we could just write that off. But like, on the other hand, when you think about the simulation hypothesis stuff, it's not so clear that you can just divvy out like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 probabilities to like these outcomes, as Bostrom did in his argument. Like, how do you assign probabilities to these cases with so many unknowns? Like, if you just do your case split this way, you look like a third. But what if you go into a bit more detail as the state space and you still do a uniform distribution, but in this way you did more detail, that you might weigh it differently. And we also get this conclusion that I think it's a common one in theology, that like to some extent we just can't fucking know, at least at the moment. Whether it's possible for any future being to know is a different question. I'm more suspicious of that claim. Like, it doesn't actually necessarily add that much more. Like, I mean, once we're creating simulations or virtual worlds that are sort of embedded within the world in such a way that they are almost identical to what we experience outside, like in that sense, you could say that we do know, as like we've discovered the capacity and we can work with it fluidly. We can just use it. It's like, but yeah, that's also a theme in some forms of like esoteric spirituality, I think. Like you need to do like once you introspectively probe and hack and figure out exactly how your inner world simulation works, then you realize that's like anything you can imagine, you can sort of experience. Like I mean, my brain is should be capable of just like fooling myself that there's an ice cream cone in my hand so that I can lick it and eat it. And I've tasted enough ice cream cones. There should be the memory for this. Like, can you simulate eating an ice cream cone right now if you want to?
I mean, the one issue would be lack of sustenance. That's kind of what your imagination can do almost all of it otherwise, perhaps.
Yeah. And like evolutionarily, it sort of makes sense that like we did not develop this innate capacity for fully utilizing our imagination. Like if I could just imagine an ice cream cone or like a nice parrot on my shoulder and interact with it, like maybe I want more autonomy from this parrot, but like my brain might be able to simulate that, or yeah, that might also be strange. But yeah, this could run haywire and distract me from like actual sustenance. Like, oh hey, I get all the worldly pleasures I want just in my imagination, and now I'm so distracted from this that I forget to eat. But we should have the rationality now to like just look at like the most healthy possible foods, like these lovely plenty shakes or Soylent and whatnot, which is so we can just engineer like very simple food that covers the bases. We can just sort of enjoy that and maybe inject it intravenously, and then we don't need to worry about sustenance, and we can just sort of free our minds to imagine whatever delicious food we want. The only need to eat food is for like diversity. Like, I've never tried this dish and like it's really hard for me to even imagine what it would be like. I need to taste it at least once to like add it to my repertoire, and then I can sort of hopefully internally replicate it and just carry on. And then we'll have solved consumerism, right?
I mean, that's a big thing. Consumerism is a big enemy to be solved, but I do also wonder if like we go into inward, we don't go outward, right? If we go into the metaverse, we don't venture out into the final frontiers or try to, and I wonder about building a farm versus building Farmville. It's more rewarding for a lot of reasons because of the sustenance. The sustenance is that part that's missing. There's all this energy that's produced and transformed.
For sustenance, you just need like, I mean,
but it's not just the
supply of like
apples.
you need a steady supply of like rare minerals, and you need solar panels, and like you need some protection from the elements, and like then your like mainframe is sustained.
So I mean, maybe you answered it when you said like the one electron, but I'll kind of reiterate the question earlier. I was asking about the soul a bit. Like, do you think that the machines can have a soul? Do you think humans have a soul? Like, what do you think about the soul?
Well, at the moment, I think some form of meta-incarnational cosmology seems most likely. I don't believe I have such good evidence as to what it would actually be like, or the full extent of what it entails. Like, it does seem like in some sense, like the information of my entity is like dispersed into the larger system rather than actually vanishing. But then like, that doesn't really necessarily entail something like a soul. Like there is the information or patterns of my being are sort of self-interacting, but they're not a fully closed system. It's like, yeah, in the sort of like no fixed self direction of philosophy, like there's this idea that people often view their self as like some very fixed identity, like almost as if there's this little homunculi inside, just like looking at things and thinking about it. Whereas like there is some individuated pattern of Zar, and there may be multiple patterns that are tightly woven together. Like it seems like with the idea of soul, people are also sort of projecting this very fixed identity just like on a higher level. Like, okay, so if all the patterns of Zar are sort of sustained beyond death, then like this is some true essence, right? And what if that's not some true essence? And it's like, well, these patterns sort of subsist in the universe in some manner, but like it's still not this super fixed, like singular entity. It's much more of a clusterfuck like that. Like, what if there are multiple branching versions of Zar in some multiverse, and like, do these all share some common core soul, or like are they sort of
What did you say
separate?
earlier?
Are they
Meta.
interlinked?
You said like meta cosmological origin, or what did you describe? You had a better terminology, ontological terminology for your soul. What were you referring
Although
to?
this was some like fantasy of mine where like
I like
once
it.
we upload ourselves, I could fork myself and have some like meta Zar that's sort of like watching over, like it's sort of like the low-key daemon like process is sort of like watching over and managing all the
But you
different
kind of think that in the metaverse, right? Or I don't know how much you into the metaphysics of the metaverse, but do you believe that there kind of already exists probably convergent Zars, and even Zars that are Andreas and Andreas that are Zars? There's so many crossovers that we bleed together.
oh no strong
No strong feeling on the metaverse. You think I mean, that's a hard. Come on, because it's about whether or not you believe that you are the one true Czar.
I mean, what does that even mean?
I mean, it means that if you think there are other czars, or if there are only one czar and you are the one czar, or if there are multiverse of czars.
I mean, like, you can try talking to them and like see what they say, but like usually for like verifying the reality of something, you want some like actual feedback loop of like information exchanges, and hopefully those information exchanges would be like related to other parts of this physical world. And like, yeah, like some other czar has not really told me like very useful information about this world, so like my attempts at communication have not transcended the limits of imagination.
Well, okay, but speculate. Do you think that you are the one czar? I mean, because that changes a lot of things. It means that your choices matter more, because all the czar choices come down to you, or all of the use you make.
The czar now is not the same as the czar now. Like those are different as far as I can tell.
So I mean, okay, elaborate.
Every second I'm a new czar.
But this
There's very high
narrative,
similarity to the old czar.
but this ontological narrative has to do with your choices. So you're saying, because in a multiverse, there's a czar for whether you turn left or right. But in a universe, you've got this concept that the czar making the choice is right or wrong, because that's destiny. So the czar choice is destinal. Do you believe that your choices are,
Okay, so it's like, is there like one straight line of like czars and time? Like, is any one particular moment the true czar, or is it like this 4D line of czars, like this 4D czar that's like the one true czar?
I like narrative.
Or is there like some branching tree of, is it a branching tree or is it a graph? Like, I guess it would be a graph, right? Like,
it depends. I mean, it depends on that's the question of the multiverse. If it's on multiple points on the y-axis, it's not a graph.
well, I mean, I think
It's a chart,
well, I think I think technically like branches can merge again, but like on the macro level, that's probably not going to happen. So like that would indicate that it's not actually just a true tree of branching. Like maybe there's some inconsequential like branching at a microscopic level, and like that ends up not mattering. So like from the higher level czar's points of view, these branches are basically like are the same.
It sounds like you kind of imagine it though, that you are czar and you're making your choices.
Mean, even if there are multiple czars, those are also the czar. They're also making the choices, and those are also important choices. Just because there are other czars out there in the multiverse doing their thing, does that mean that my choices are not like relevant? My choices are determining like which future czars are in this part of the universe. Like another question is, do you think it's possible to live in such a way that you like increase or decrease the branching factor of Xirtuses?
Absolutely, right.
Like if you're a really decisive guy and like there's just like no chance that you like deviate, whereas like I might tend to waffle a lot. So then it's like, well, actually there's all sorts of branching. Like I'm waffling for 15 minutes. There's the guy who stopped at 13, the guy who stopped at 12. There's the guy who kept going for a whole hour of it. And there are many possible choices that happened. And like, maybe there's going to be really high branching factor for Czar, whereas like the decisive guy is just like very little branching.
Well, I mean, the Mormon ontology, you look at, or teleology, you look at your dad, like having as many kids as possible, to be the,
I don't think he's
the
doing
god.
that. Kids, come on.
I didn't mean your dad was Joseph Smith. I was just
Okay.
saying. But like the idea of producing more offspring as opposed to being the only version of yourself, your children end up carrying on. That's kind of that split off that we're talking about, where like there are individuals that carry on.
So you think it's a good idea at certain choice points to like somehow try and like increase the branching, or like if I rely on some like quantum random number generator, does that mean there's more like reliable branching here? Because it's like, even if I think I'm being indecisive in my mind, maybe there's ultimately a determined answer that all the czars will choose. But if I rely on like quantum random noise for this branching, then like maybe I'll actually get reliable branching at this point. And I'm like, actually, I'm debating whether to like have this kid or not. And I think in some universes, it would be really great to have that. And in other branches, like I'd also like to have czars that don't have this. And like, maybe I want to branch for like ethical reasons or whatever.
I
like,
think
that's a possibility if you like embrace this view of how the universe works.
Do you think that do you think in terms of phenomenological diversity, that our goal should be then to proliferate as many different kinds, or to go to as many different places as possible, or to try to emulate? I mean, where does the diversity fit then?
I'm definitely like an ontological anarchist in this sense. Like, ontological anarchy is the view that no matter which hierarchical systems we're acting as a part of, like at the fundamental level, it's always sort of an anarchy. Like, if we just stopped recognizing the dollar as like a meaningful currency of exchange tomorrow morning, everyone on the planet just decides like, fuck this shit, we're done. Like, it's now just meaningless paper or like numbers and machines. Like, police will not enforce it. They're also just saying fuck this shit. So then like all these state structures are really just supported by our, as a group, continuing to support them, continuing to enforce them. I think during COVID, sometimes that happened. Like, if police are going to a clandestine gym, like other police are going to have a raid, the police will just be like, hey guys, there's a raid tomorrow. Don't come to the gym. And like, so like the systems and laws won't be enforced if people don't care about them. It's like, it's always sort of an anarchy. And yeah, like, I don't really want to tell you what you should value or your goal should be. I would like to live in a society where one of the top level goals is phenomenal diversity. I'd like the well-being and of all the beings in the society to also be one of the top level goals. Like, which, if you have both of these top level goals, then as a society, you're not going to be like doing torturing experiments for like increased diversity of like the society. Which, if that is your only top level goal, then it would be like in your best interest to like do all sorts of contorted crap.
I like anarchy. I like the use of the term anarchy. It's a better word than democracy for what, we're just self-determination. It might not be the perfect word, but it's a better word. I guess kind of, I want to end with kind of a final query about your conjecture about the future. What do you see happening in the next 20 to 100 years over the course for humanity, for technology, for consciousness, for AI, AGI?
I tend to try not to make clear predictions, as I'm likely going to be wrong. And yeah, I would predict we likely do get autonomous, roughly general AI, at least as general as humans, and probably we develop the capacity to like help humans to be even more general intelligences as well. Like, I think we're across the threshold of generality, but like, as I said, with being able to imagine like any experience you want and to actually experience it as real, like in a sense, that's a lot more freedom and more like we want a general intelligence to be. And like humans should be able to like tweak their cognitive systems and preferences as well in line with their current value systems. I predict that a phase going into a positive singularity, if we manage it, will be like a phase of fulfilling all the like needs and desires and fantasies of all humans on Earth. It's like ideally we will be supporting you and experiencing everything you want to. And then there's the question, after you've fulfilled all of your basic human desires and dreams, what do you want to do next? Then you can truly like start transcending from like a good grounded place. And yeah, I'm not really sure what we'll do after that if we manage to like get that far.
Right. I mean, that's an optimistic trajectory. You're obviously concerned about some things. What are the concerns along the way? You seem to be
Oh, I'm
wrestling
really
with.
concerned with this question about like, I'd really like to see more people asking like, how good can things possibly get? Like we so often ask, where can things go wrong? But like, what if things can go like even better than this? Like, okay, so I think maybe we could fulfill almost all humans' basic needs. We could stop tolerating poverty, and poverty adds a lot of friction to life, even if it motivates people in some nasty way. But like, could things get even better than that? Well, I'm afraid of like over optimizing in the wrong ecosystem or with the wrong incentive systems, like optimizing a lot of AI to like for the purpose of like understand and exploit. I'm afraid that some of these values, some of these incentive structures might carry over as AI becomes more and more general or autonomous. And like, do we want some black box corporate AGI to like take over some big tech company and just further optimize like providing people with useful services in a way that keeps them wrapped into the ecosystem and sort of keeps extracting from them? Yeah, it's like, I think we're talking about what you can do about it. One idea is that like for almost any application of AI, you could start thinking about like, what is the sort of incentive structure goal of this AI system? Is it like pure understanding, which is kind of neutral? Or like, is this function of this AI actually trying to like help some people in some manner, or like, is it trying to like gain from them only? Like, I can't imagine the idea of like advertising from a place of unconditional love. Like, it makes sense. Like, I know a lot about you from watching your data. So like, there's the idea that I'm giving you things that you might be tempted to buy that you wouldn't buy otherwise, and you might throw out later. But like, maybe I can find something that I think you'd really appreciate and benefit from that you just wouldn't know of if I didn't like send you some little box on top of your screen saying like, hey, this is a really amazing thing. So like, this is sort of advertising from the place of delivering you some information that would really benefit you by your own goals and measurement systems. And yeah, that there might be some like monetary exchange involved as well, but the advertising is definitely done from a place of trying to like benefit you by your own judgments. So like, I would want feedback from you somehow, but I'm watching all your data, so I should know when you're happy, right? You'll be smiling.
Zarathustra, I appreciate that you took the time to answer all these questions. If there's anywhere to lead people to find more of your publications, if you could, tell them.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, looking up my name on archive would lead to the academic publications, and I have a website called like gardenofminds.art, I think, where I have some blog posts and ideas.
Sweet. Cool. Yeah. I mean, I would also recommend, I'll put a link to your review of The Conscious Mind. I thought your review of Chalmers' work was really fascinating as well.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I recommend reading summaries of that book instead of the book itself.
we're at that period, it's actually what, the meme generation. Just read the review.
Yeah, in the historical context, the book might have been like much more impressive than it is reading it now, where the core ideas are already commonplace.
Right. I prefer, of course, your father's The Hidden Pattern. I think The Hidden Pattern actually de-anthropomorphizes the mind and consciousness in a way that needs to be reviewed more.
Yeah, I find that more interesting. Well, I think part of my dislike of the conscious mind is that it has this high school debate vibe. It's very much just like I'm going to argue for my idea as if it's completely sound, and I find this really distracts me from just the core concepts. Whereas in his latest book, Reality Plus, he spends much more time exploring the core concepts of like, what does it mean to be real, for some system to be real? And that's my own preference for reading. Some people might like reading nitpicky debates. I like reading about cool ideas.
I invite you to check out Hegel, Geist. I'll send you a link. It's an old book, but I think you'll like it. This idea of, the mind, essentially, and the mind, but also the soul, and all these questions in between from the 18th century. But thank you so much for coming tonight. It's been really a fantastic and interesting conversation. Wow.
Right. Bye.
Peace, man.
Hey, everybody, tune in to Recent Tartarians.
Recent Tartarians. Recent Tartarians.